The person who gets the most votes wins. Seems simple enough. However, when we dive into the details of how this plays out in the US, especially within the context of elections, things get more complicated. The US operates primarily under a two-party system, and while voters technically have more than two options, in practice, the structure of elections often discourages voting for third parties. This creates a dilemma. While voters may want more choices, the system frequently makes it seem like they don't have any viable alternatives. Let's explore why this happens and how reforms like proportional representation and ranked choice voting could make elections more representative. In the US, elections are often viewed as a binary choice between two major parties, Democrats and Republicans. Many voters feel disillusioned by the lack of other viable options, as large portions of the electorate do not fully support either major party. Polls consistently show that a significant number of Americans don't want either major party's candidates running, yet they feel trapped in this two-party system. The reality is that more options are available. Third-party candidates often run for office, but the nature of the U.S. electoral system makes it difficult for them to gain significant support. One of the main issues is the winner-takes-all system used in most U.S. elections. In this system, only the candidate who receives the most votes in a district wins, leaving all other votes essentially wasted. This discourages voters from supporting third-party candidates because they feel like their vote won't matter. Instead, they often opt for the lesser of two evils by voting for one of the two major parties, even if that's not their preferred choice. Voting for a third-party candidate can even inadvertently help the party a voter least agrees with by taking votes away from one of the major candidates, a phenomenon known as the spoiler effect. This issue is not limited to a few isolated cases. It's a nationwide problem that results from the way U.S. elections are structured. For example, in the 2022 congressional elections in New England, 36% of voters supported Republicans, yet none of the region's 21 congressional representatives are Republicans. This lack of representation occurs because each congressional district elects only one representative, and the candidate who receives the most votes wins, regardless of how much support other candidates have. The same issue exists in places like Oklahoma, where about a third of voters typically support Democratic candidates, but the state has no Democratic representatives. While gerrymandering, the manipulation of district boundaries for political advantage, often gets blamed for this lack of representation, it's not always the root cause. Even in cases where districts are drawn by independent commissions, like in Massachusetts, the winner-takes-all system often results in skewed outcomes. Researchers have found that no matter how districts are drawn, Massachusetts would still end up with an overwhelmingly Democratic delegation because of the way votes are concentrated. This problem is compounded when we consider the possibility of third-party candidates receiving significant support. Imagine a scenario where a third party garners 25% of the vote in every district across the country. Under the current system, that party would win 0 seats in Congress. This illustrates how the winner-takes-all system inherently disadvantages third parties, making it difficult for them to compete on a level playing field. Fortunately, most other democracies don't work this way. In countries like Germany, for example, elections use a system known as proportional representation. In proportional representation, the percentage of votes a party receives is directly reflected in the number of seats it wins in the legislature. This means that if a party wins 25% of the vote, it would get roughly 25% of the seats, regardless of whether it wins individual districts. Germany's system combines elements of both winner-takes-all and proportional representation. Voters cast 2 ballots, one for a candidate to represent their district and one for a party. Some seats in the legislature are filled by candidates who win district elections, but the rest are allocated based on the party vote to ensure that the overall result is proportional. This allows smaller parties to gain representation, even if they don't win any districts outright. Other countries use different forms of proportional representation. In Spain, voters cast ballots for parties rather than individual candidates, and each party's share of the vote determines how many seats they get. In open list systems, like those used in Finland, Belgium, and Denmark, voters choose both a party and individual candidates. The number of seats each party wins is proportional to its share of the vote, and the candidates who receive the most votes within each party fill those seats. Another promising electoral reform is ranked choice voting, which is already being used in some U.S. states and cities. In ranked choice voting, voters rank candidates in order of preference. If no candidate wins a majority of first-choice votes, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and their supporters' votes are redistributed to their next choice. This process continues until one candidate has a majority. Ranked choice voting reduces the spoiler effect by allowing voters to support third-party candidates without fear of wasting their vote, as their vote can still count if their preferred candidate is eliminated. However, ranked choice voting alone doesn't necessarily make it easier for third parties to win, especially in single-winner elections. To truly make elections more representative, we would need to combine ranked choice voting with multi-winner elections. In a multi-winner election, multiple candidates are elected to represent a district, allowing for more proportional outcomes. For example, in a state like Oklahoma, instead of having 5 separate districts, the entire state could act as a single district that elects 5 representatives. This would allow for more balanced representation, with some seats going to Democrats and others to Republicans, rather than having all 5 seats held by one party. Changing the U.S. electoral system to make it more representative won't be easy. Federal law currently requires that each congressional district elect only one representative, so any move toward proportional representation would require a change in the law. However, states and cities have more flexibility in how they elect their legislatures and city councils, so there is potential for experimentation with proportional representation at the local level. Ultimately, adopting proportional representation or ranked choice voting on a larger scale could make U.S. elections more competitive, reduce polarization, and give voters more meaningful choices. Many other democracies around the world have already adopted these systems, and there is growing recognition in the U.S. that the current system is in need of reform. By updating our electoral system, we can ensure that our democracy better reflects the will of the people.